The update there from central Moscow. Well, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, we've got a panel of guests we've put together to try and kick this around to see where it may well go over the coming hours and days. Marcus Papadopoulos is a Middle East commentator and editor of Politics First. Pavel Andreev, with me now. Hi, sir. Executive Director of the Valdai Club Foundation, a discussion group of leading experts across many fields. We've also got Sunny Hundai as well. He's editor of the political blog Liberal Conspiracy, and Anissa Naouai, RT's Senior Political Correspondent. Guys, thank you all for your time. Sunny, if I can come to you first of all, if I may. There seems to be a consensus around the world that the Assad regime needs to pay for the alleged chemical weapon attack here. But this is at the same time as the UN is still investigating. Are we going to see an attack before that UN investigation has actually reported firm, hard, concrete facts back, do you think?
No, I don't think that will happen. I think there's a lot of pressure on President Obama and certainly in the UK on Prime Minister Cameron to show firm evidence, before they take any action. Today, the Labour Party said that they're not going to support any intervention in terms of the UK unless the Prime Minister comes to the House of Parliament with firm evidence. So there's going to be, I think that even the coalition, which is looking to do something more recently, the coalition of Western nations is going to start splintering unless, of course, they wait, they show the evidence, and they go properly before they take any action, probably with some evidence. So I don't think it's going to happen before that. OK, Marcus, you're in London. Are you as optimistic that everyone's going to hang fire until there's cool, hard facts on the table here, or not?
Well, can I just say, I think the question that actually should be asked to people at the moment in Britain is it acceptable for America and its allies to be deciding which country is liable to be attacked in the world and which country isn't liable to be attacked in the world? America and its allies are not the police, they're not the policemen of the world. That's completely unacceptable. America has no right, legal or moral right, to attack an independent sovereign country. This should be the focus of discussions regarding Syria. We saw this in Bosnia, we saw this in Kosovo, we saw this in Iraq, we saw this in Libya, we're seeing it again in Syria. It's lie after lie to achieve geostrategic objectives.
Pavel Andreev, is history repeating itself here then?
Well, it does indeed look as a pattern, which has been explored quite a number of times over the past decade. Having said that, previously you could see some strategy, and Marcus was talking about some geostrategic aims. I can hardly see any geostrategic aims as such here. There is a tactics. There is some kind of rushing from one region to another, from one aim to another, and let's not forget that people who are now in the driving seat in Washington are very different from those who were there in 2003, for example. You can see a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Barack Obama. He should have been stripped of his Nobel Prize if he declared this war. It's John Kerry, who was very much an opponent of George Bush's position and policy on invading Iraq. So maybe these people do have some morality, which is essential to overturn this pattern and really seek the due diligence process in the verifying the CW. In Syria.
Anissa, from all the information you've been across tonight, where do you think this is going, and where is that information? We heard yesterday that Obama had declassified this proof, if you like, that Assad was behind the chemical attack. Still not come to surface yet, as far as we know, is it?
I'm quite pessimistic. I have to disagree with Sunny. First of all, I think that the United States could very well go it. Maybe not alone, but certainly without the UN Security Council. I mean, we've seen that before. It's a surprise to me that anybody would debate that the US would go ahead, and it doesn't hide that it doesn't hold very much value for the decisions that are made in New York at the UN. With that said, the questions being asked and the debates that are happening are not the debates that Marcus was talking about. Does the United States or anyone else have the right to intervene when we haven't seen that evidence? And we are still hearing very strong rhetoric out of the UK. William Hague just today speaking about how the UN investigation taking place is scientific, basically implying let them do their work, but we have our work. And it seemed very obvious, to me at least, that they have made some kind of decision.
And justifying it by saying international law's been broken. Two seconds, we will come to you in a second. I mean, he's justified it, hasn't he, by saying international law's been broken, so therefore there's no problem with going ahead without a consensus. Is that really the way forward, though? Sunni, do two rights make a wrong, as you see it?
Well, I think we should be clear about something. Syria is already a mess because Russia, Iran and Hezbollah are defending Assad and trying to keep him in place and have been supplying weapons to him to keep him there. Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey have lined up against him and are funding the rebel armies against him. So this idea that the United States and the UK are now suddenly intervening in another country is just ludicrous. I mean, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny because Syria is already a battlefield to decide what's going on in terms of the future of the Middle East.
And with a growing presence of Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra too.
Right, exactly. So there are already several countries taking part in what's going on over there. The United States and the UK are intervening in a specific point, which is about the usage of chemical weapons. And also the interventions that they're going to take are going to be very minimal. Right, no, there is going to be demands for proof. The Labour Party, as I said, in the UK.
Let's bring Marcus
in. The Labour Party.
Let's bring Marcus. Can
I just finish that?
Finish your point, then we'll come to Marcus. Okay.
Yes, Kevin. Yes, Kevin. I think it's very important to make this clear to domestic audiences in the West, because they don't hear this from the mainstream media. They don't hear this from their politicians. The the West's stance on Syria is not guided by human rights, democracy, or the rule of law. It's guided.
No one said it was.
Because Syria pursues an independent foreign policy. It has a close relationship with Russia and Iran. That's why it's being targeted. If the West's stance is all about democracy, human rights and the rule of law, then why is there not an American naval flotilla off the coast of Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia has arguably the most wicked regime in the world, where homosexuality is punishable by death, apostasy is punishable by death, adultery for women is punishable by death, and Saudi Arabia is the root of Islamic extremism and terrorism in the world. 9/11, the London bombings, the Madrid bombings, the Bali bombings, all go back to Saudi Arabia. It is preposterous nonsense to say that the West's stance on Syria is guided by a notion of freedom or human rights. It's simply untenable.
Can I just respond? Can I just point out that the intervention in Syria is not about human rights? And actually, if it was a humanitarian intervention, then they would have intervened 2 years ago. Since 100,000 people, Syrians, have died in the hands of Assad since. So firstly, it's not a humanitarian intervention. Their aim is to take revenge for the usage of chemical weapons and to send out a signal that any government that uses chemical weapons on its own people is going to face some international sanctions.
Okay, guys, I'd like to bring
what they're doing is...
I'd like to bring in Pavel.
Just briefly, they're going to launch... Sorry, go on.
Look, finish your point. Finish your point quickly.
My point is briefly that they're only going to launch a few attacks on military targets in Syria, and it's not going to be a ground intervention. It's not going to be a humanitarian
intervention. Against an independent sovereign country. Against an independent sovereign country. Against an independent sovereign country.
Okay,
well, then we should ask Russia, Iran, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia to not take to not also intervene. I mean, there are lots of countries already intervening, including Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, guys, you made your point.
Saudi Arabia and Qatar hardly conform to your liberal principles that you believe in life, do they?
Okay, Marcus, I want to talk to Pavel. I'd like to talk to Pavel, guys. Excuse me a sec.
They hardly, Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
What's Russia's position?
Yourself and your views, is it?
Okay, guys, thanks. What's Russia's position here? What's Russia's position here? If there was an intervention, if it does happen, what would Russia do? And moreover, what if in the next 48 hours or so, this proof that has been talked about, that America has, that's been declassified, that we're hearing, is going to be made public? What if it does come out? What's Russia going to do then?
Well, it's really hard to tell. Russia is definitely not going into war, use its nuclear deterrence to change the situation. What is important here to stress here is that Syria is indeed a mess, but it is a mess to a large degree due to the outside influence from outside forces in Syria. So basically, when somebody argues that now the intervention should have been employed 2 years ago, well, it shouldn't have. And it shouldn't be considered now at the point when the pro-regime forces are actually gaining ground. And there is much more road paved to a political transition. If you're talking about the Russian position has always been about the political transition. It was not about Assad per se. It was about political transition. And it was the rebel forces who are not feeling themselves well positioned to participate in that kind of talks. One might argue that it is because a lot of the driving force behind the rebel force is of a rather radical thinking, to put it mildly, and they would not get support and would not get to the ruling positions in the country through the political transitions. Now, the only way, if you're talking about the way to settlement in Syria, it's surely not one of those forceful scenarios, but Geneva II process.
And let me just go back to that point. If information comes out that we're hearing, that America says it's got this information that proves that the Assad regime was behind it, if it is released tomorrow, how would Russia change its tune here? It would listen, it would take that information and act accordingly, yeah?
It should be discussed in the Security Council. One would be skeptical about Security Council resolution on that, but it is either Security Council or might is right principle.
I think it's really important here, excuse me for interrupting, to not discuss so much the what-ifs, but the we-haves. And we have no proof. So it's surprising to me that Sunny and most of the mainstream media can report and talk about this and discuss the situation in Syria as if it's already been proven. This is fact. And they're basically, a lot of the press is copying and pasting these statements that we're hearing from very high-ranking officials in the West. Like I said, we heard from William Hague, UK Foreign Secretary, saying that they do believe this is a chemical attack by the Assad regime. US Vice President Joe Biden, there's no doubt who is responsible for this heinous use of chemical weapons in Syria. Chuck Hagel, US Defense Secretary, I think that intelligence will conclude that the government of Syria was responsible. Are we going to see this evidence, or are we going to see it after the fact that...
As Colin Powell's stunt in the Security Council showed 10 years ago, seeing the evidence doesn't mean to have it.
And of course, one of the big proponents here going along with it, William Hague, UK's foreign minister, he's taken a hard line on this from the start. He was quick to react, wasn't he, to counter criticism that there are similarities in the build-up to the war in Iraq, WMD. We've got a clip of him talking about that. Let's take a quick listen.
This is a very different situation from anything that happened over Iraq. I think we have to be clear about this. The Assad regime acknowledges it has chemical weapons. There are previous instances over the last year when we believe it's used chemical weapons. There is no plausible alternative explanation for this other than that they have used chemical weapons. It is a quite different situation from Iraq, an entirely different situation, and our government is going about it in an entirely different way. So there is no comparison between this and Iraq. This is where a crime against humanity has been committed, and there can be no argument about that.
Marcus Papadopoulos, no similarities at all?
Oh, I think there are similarities. Let's have a look at the track record over the last 20 years of the West in the wars it's fought. In Kosovo, the West claimed 100,000 Kosovan Albanians had been murdered by the Serbs. Lie. Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. Lie. Libya, tens of thousands of civilians slaughtered by Colonel Gaddafi's forces. A lie. And now with Syria, what the Western public has been subjected to over the last 2 years, are heinous stories that the Syrian government and the Syrian armed forces, the only legitimate groups in Syria, have been slaughtering women, men and children. That's completely uncorroborated. It's all about pursuing geostrategic objectives. The ambition is to simply ensure Western political dominance in the Middle East. Syria is the one remaining country which will not bow to the West. Syria will not bow to the West. That's why it's being
I'm sorry, but this is just ridiculous.
If Syria
Can I just point out one thing?
Iran will be next. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. You and the way
it is completely ridiculous. Let me get a word in edgeways, please.
It's time the British
let me get a word in edgeways,
please.
Listen.
It's time the British public.
I think it's important to point out that Libya. I think it's important to point out.
Marcus, you've made your point, sir. Let Sunny have his word now, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think anyone can, in fact, there are lots of videos which have been uploaded by Syrian doctors as well as in hospitals. There was a video published by ITV News the other day which showed clear examples of kids talking while they were suffering from an attack of a chemical weapon. I mean, this idea that this gentleman is saying that this is a lie about WMDs. There is a clear difference. Now we have video evidence which has been published to YouTube, and it's also been published and independently corroborated in the New York Times.
But it hasn't
let me just finish my point, please. Let me just finish my point. The video has been there's been loads of videos published showing that these kids have had chemical attacks on them.
Okay, look, we've only got a couple
We've seen pictures of
independent investigation. That is what is required.
We have seen pictures and videos of chemical weapon attacks.
Stop citing opposition. Stop citing opposition activists. We need to approach
Look, let's cite US and UK officials that say they have the evidence. Why can't we see it? Videos of children are not enough.
Evidence. You're completely right.
Guys, we've only got a couple of...
No, you're right that
we've only got a short amount of time left. I want to ask you about...
Shut up.
I want to ask you about in our final minute.
Just shut up for 1 second so I can get a word in. I just want to make my point about chemical weapons, and they can spout all the nonsense about the Syrian government he wants to. Listen, the fact of the matter is that we have seen proper video evidence and we have seen photographic evidence of children on the after effects of chemical weapon attacks. There have been lots of videos posted about showing sarin and the effects of sarin. Now the key question here is not whether the chemical weapons have been used. The key question here is who used them. And that's the thing that the UN inspectors are now trying to find out in terms of where was that... Sorry?
Right, and we still don't know. Look, there's one final thought. Guys,
what do you mean still don't know? You're a second ago you were denying that there was any chemical weapons being used at all, and now you're now pretending.
I'm going to have to interject, or else we'll have to cut you off.
In London
in the final minute of this programme, I want to ask you...
sit in London and determine that?
Guys, please, I want to ask you in the final minute of the programme what the implications would be of an intervention, i.e., Sunny, you were talking earlier on that the thought is this could be a short, sharp intervention, of a rap over the knuckles. How do we know that? How do the people planning this, have they got a clear plan? Are they absolutely sure this won't go on, won't become another Afghanistan, won't become another Iraq? And how do we know it won't spread?
Well,
we've already heard that Iran could be targeting Israel if this happens. I mean, how do we know it's going to be so confined?
No, I mean, let's be clear on a few points. There are no government troops of the British government or the United States government which are going to be landing in Syria at all, not even close. And so the point is they're going to take a few well-aimed shots at Syrian weapons, and that's about it. They can't do anything more than that, and they have said this is not about regime change. So they're not... Can I just make my point, please? You will get your turn. The point is that they are going to focus on very short and sharp. They've said themselves that we're not going to put any ground troops in Syria, and the government in the UK will not support any such action because the statement by the Prime Minister as well as the Labour Party will say we want to limit the action necessary. So let me just be clear: this is not going to be like Afghanistan and Iraq because firstly, there's not going to be any Western troops. Secondly, this is going to go on for a while because Assad is being supported by various countries, including Iran and Russia, and his opposition is being supported by various countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So that proxy war will continue for a while, regardless of whether the United States and the UK are there or going to be.
Which is a big difference with Iraq.
Marcus, well, I mean, 15 seconds for you in response here, please.
Do you know, Kevin, the sad and regrettable thing is this. People like Sunny and the attitude he espoused, they forget one thing. We're talking about the Syrian people. They've had to endure hell on earth over the last 2 years. And the way that Sunny and Western politicians and journalists talk about attacking a country so flippantly is so distressing. Can you imagine what it must be like to be bombarded with bombs,
you're the one who supported,
with Tomahawk cruise
Assad,
missiles? Sonny, why don't you talk to people that experienced the Blitz in London? Why don't you talk to people that have lived through bombing campaigns? Why don't you talk about the 100,000
people that have been
You
killed by
have very
Assad?
little time.
Why don't you talk
for the
about the
Syrian?
100,000
You have
people
very little
that have been
time.
killed by Assad?
You have very little time for the people. For the
A last
Syrian
final
people.
thought. A last final thought with
I'd like
Pavel.
to make as well, Kevin.
Pavel, from the Russian.
Point I'd like to make.
We're going to run out. We've got to get to a break, sir.
Could you imagine what the response would be if Russia was talking openly about attacking another country? There would be uproar in the world. Why is it acceptable for America to talk about attacking another country?
Guys, I'm going to leave a final thought to Pavel, another member of our panel who's sitting here patiently. How is this going to pan out over the next week or so?
It's really hard to put out the timetable because the window of opportunity for actual bombing is very short. What I wanted to finish with is, and then there were like G20, and it's better not to happen on the G20 week, for sure. What I would like to stress here is that there is no goods, no win-wins out of the bombing campaign. It's either would lead to nothing, as it did in 1998 with bombing of Somalia, or it would lead to further deterioration and devastation of the country of Syria, of the nation, and a split out and complete change of the balance, which has been achieved first in Iraq, and now it is being further determinated in the balance in the region. It's really when Marcus is talking about geopolitical strategy, I don't see it. The strategy is in complete shambles. There is no foreign policy objectives here. It's just pure senses or stereotypes or some reactions, really.
All right, Pavel, thanks for your time. Pavel Andreev there, Executive Director of the Valdai Club. Also, Marcus Papadopoulos and Sunny Hundai. Thank you both guys as well for your input. It's been most interesting. And of course, Anissa Naouai as well. Nice to see you in the studio as well. Hope you've enjoyed it too.